What's up, gangsters? Happy belated, perhaps, I don't know when I'll be able to finish editing this video, New Year. 2025. Who would have thought? As is tradition here on my channel, I would like to start off this year by taking a look back at some of the best movies that I've watched for the very first time last year in 2024. And as is tradition here on my channel, by best, I really just mean movies that I would like to share with you guys and, talk about for a little bit. As always, the clips that I use in these videos, I just take them from trailers that I found on YouTube. So the quality and the overall editing might be a little different from what you're used to with my videos. But hey, let that not ruin our fun. Also, really quick, a huge loving shout out to the latest Patreon members. Cool, Shannon Louise, Peter Hobrick, Ulf the Wolf, Lavish Saturn, Jay Holland, Mike Litteris, got him, Kim, James Fairfield, Jose Aragon, and Sin Hansen. Thank you so much. You guys are the best, and I wish you nothing but happiness in 2025. So, if you like what I do here with my Horrible Reviews channel, you too can become a member over at patreon.com/horrible-reviews. There's some cool perks, so yeah, check it out. And now, without further ado, here's 25 movies from 13 different countries spanning 5 decades? There's a little bit of a recency bias this year. And a wide variety of genres, so let's go. And let's start with one of last year's biggest releases, Anora. Personally, I'm not necessarily the biggest Sean Baker fan, but after seeing the trailer, I became quite intrigued and actually ended up catching the movie in theaters on 35mm, and I'm glad I did because I kinda love it. We follow Anora, a stripper who becomes infatuated with this Russian trust fund kid. They quickly marry, but then when his parents want the marriage annulled, he disappears and So, I expected this to be a way more hard-hitting social drama, but I was quite surprised to find out it's mostly just really hilarious. The majority of the movie focuses on the father's henchman, if you will, dragging Anora around town searching for the guy, which makes for a series of pretty wild, highly entertaining sequences. I've read some criticism online describing this movie as misogynistic, something that honestly did not cross my mind at all while watching, which either makes me part of the problem, or there's no real issue, and some people can just distinguish between a good time at the movies and real life. But hey, that's a discussion for another time. You know I always gotta throw in some unhinged outsider art cinema with these videos. Enter Baby Cat. From the depths of the Tubi library comes this... what even is this? I guess ultimately it's a softcore fetish porn comedy? Although in that case there's definitely not enough porn, and the comedy is unintentionally funny because cringe at best. It follows a young woman in LA with the titular baby cat, a girl in a sexy cat costume who acts like a cat every day, all day, roaming around the apartment building she just moved in. And yes, of course they fall in love. The absolute show stealer here is the totally inept technical execution of it all. Which, I do feel that, unfortunately, the filmmakers must have been in on the joke at least a little bit, because seriously, nobody can fuck up editing, green screen effects, and color grading this bad. Still, it's all so incompetently done that you'll find yourself screaming at your screen in disbelief for most of the movie's running time. Yeah, perfect if you're in the mood for a good dose of brain-melting what-the-fuckery. If you've seen any of these videos before, you know I absolutely love Eastern European social-political satire, and Balkan Spy from former Yugoslavia is another home run. We follow a man who suspects that the new subtenant that they let into their household is actually a spy, like an enemy of the state, which leads him spiraling down a rabbit hole of paranoia, resulting in a bunch of hilarious set pieces. What I always love so much about these movies is the almost pitch-perfect balance between drama and black comedy, as well as the fact that they work perfectly well at face value, but offer so much more richness in story and commentary if you dig a little deeper. In Balkan Spy, it might not be super subtle, but themes like the influence and consequences of totalitarianism work so well because you're not being hit over the head with it. Surely not for everyone, but if you enjoyed some of the Eastern European black comedies I've talked about and recommended in the past, yeah, be sure to give this one a go as well. From Brazil, Carandiru, based on a book by Brazilian physician Drauzio Varela, which in turn is based on his experience at the Carandiru Penitentiary, infamous for the 92 massacre where over 100 inmates were killed by police. So, while this could be seen as a true crime movie, it doesn't necessarily focus on the massacre, but more so the characters, which are fictional, from what I understand, yet it all still feels so incredibly real, in a social realism kind of way, not unlike the director's other work, including Picciotti, which I've covered in my Disturbing Movie series. The movie is quite episodic, following different inmates who we get to know through their stories and experiences in prison. It's raw, it's real, it can be surprisingly sweet and funny, but then, even though you know what's coming towards the end, it'll still hit hard as it gets rather disturbing without ever feeling gratuitous. And I think I'll leave it at that for now. Very well made piece of important cinema that's absolutely worth checking out. From my neighboring country Belgium comes Close. We follow 13-year-old Leo, who is really close, get it, with his best friend. But when some kids at school start commenting and questioning just how close they are, it creates a rift in their friendship's dynamic, and well, I don't want to go into detail too much. I mean, I went in more or less completely blind and that worked wonders. So, it's a drama, coming of age-ish, and what worked best in this movie for me was just how realistic it all felt. The kids are actual kids, and first-time actor Aiden Dumbrim gives a surprisingly outstanding performance as Leo. It all comes across very naturally. The movie explores a range of emotions, none of which feels spoon-fed or overly spelled out. It's all done through nuanced performances, facial expressions, and body language, even in the silence. I kinda wish we could have seen more from the perspective of his best friend, but that's just not this movie. We really experience it all through this one particular 13-year-old kid, resulting in a beautifully made, emotionally heavy ride. Oh my goodness, the coffee table. La mesita del comedor, since it's a Spanish movie. I heard things about this movie, so I was curious to see just how bad it gets, and, well, it definitely delivers. I don't want to dive into the story too much, because I feel that even the premise itself is a bit of a spoiler. But let's say it's kind of like, imagine the worst thing imaginable happening to you, and now you're trying to keep this a secret during an awkward family dinner. The result is an anxiety-inducing, pitch-black comedic endurance test. I actually wish it would have leaned into the anxiety even more in an audiovisual manner a la Gaspar Noé's climax. It could have also been, say, half an hour shorter, but then again, maybe in a way it being slightly too long adds to this fuck feeling, It really is the final buzz of what the hell would you do in a situation like that type movies, and for that alone, it's definitely worth checking out. From one uncomfortable Spanish language viewing experience to the next, this time from Mexico, it's Daniel and Ana. Ana? Where the two titular siblings are one day kidnapped by a bunch of goons and forced to have sex with each other while being filmed. They return home mostly physically unharmed, but as you can imagine, it kinda messes with the family dynamics. Oh man, this is not a fun watch, and absolutely borders on misery porn. The main incident, if you will, is obviously incredibly hard to sit through, but it doesn't get much easier during the aftermath. And I'd say that's where the strength of the movie lies. It's completely unpredictable how any person would react to this kind of traumatic experience, and the movie does a decent job exploring this. It's bleak, it's frustrating, it's... man, it's not fun. But
You know, sometimes you might just be in the mood for something just fuck that isn't your typical disturbing torture and gore movie, and then, well, this'll probably get the job done. Back to Europe for The Demon, Il Demonio. Probably my wife's favorite discovery of the year, and it truly is a bit of a hidden gem. About a young woman in a small village who starts acting a little unhinged after being rejected by a man she's obsessed with, leading to the townsfolk going on a literal witch hunt. And I always love these kind of folk horror witch hunt movies. They're often so aesthetically pleasing to me with their costumes, locations, and imagery, and, well, no exception here. It is rare, for me at least, to see them set in a contemporary setting, which, if anything, makes this movie even scarier because, fuck man, like, people should have really known better by then. The black and white cinematography looks amazing. The central performance by Dalia Lavi is simply mesmerizing. Her beauty and seemingly childlike innocence add so much to the charm of her portrayal that even if she does go a little overboard in her unhingedness, I just can't stay mad at her for too long. All in all, sad story with interesting social themes being explored, excellent execution, fantastic movie. Descent into Darkness, or Sorgoj Prakov, as the poster shows. Or My European Nightmare. Like, this movie has all the titles. It's a found footage style horror comedy where the director stars as an Eastern European journalist documenting his travels in Paris in search of the European dream, which, as at least 2 of the 3 titles suggest, does not go exactly as planned. It's pretty hilarious though. Definitely darkly comedic in just how over the top it gets. Kind of along the lines of other found footage style movies like Be My Cat, A Film for Anne, and Making Of, also known as Devil's Weekend. And while not as batshit crazy as the latter, our main character does find himself pushed into just complete levels of unhinged insanity. It's fun, man. The constant escalation works like a charm. The journalist is likable, you feel for him, up to a certain point though, towards the end, but yeah, not really all that much to add to that. From a technical filmmaking point of view, it's a found footage movie, no? So, rather well done. And so yeah, if you don't have a problem with that, be sure to check it out. It's a fun ride for sure. Then we have Dìdi, the latest in a string of nostalgic, slice-of-life, coming-of-age tragic comedies. And if you've been keeping up with these type of movies, specifically mid-90s, you sorta know what to expect. It does set itself apart though, first of all by being set more in the mid-2000s, and by focusing on the protagonist, a Taiwanese-American boy, navigating the complexities of his cultural identity, so to speak. And I really quite like this one, mostly because it feels earnest, probably because of the fact that it's a semi-autobiographical script from writer-director Sean Wong. It's relatable, even if you aren't a minority or into skateboarding, as it taps into more universal themes like wanting to fit in and parent-child relationships. Packed with just the right amount of teenage cringe and awkwardness, the movie avoids becoming overly sentimental while still feeling heartfelt, resulting in a genuine, touching piece of coming-of-age cinema. Yeah, good stuff. From David Pryor, not to be confused with David A. Pryor, the genius behind such masterpieces as Sledgehammer, Deadly Prey, and Aerobicide, comes The Empty Man. And, well, this is quite something. After a fantastic 50-minute opening sequence that works as a terrific, creepy horror short on its own, the movie turns into a rather unique thriller horror movie. A blend of vigilante police investigation, Slender Man-type creepypasta, secret cults, and cosmic horror. It might all be a little overly ambitious. The mixing of different genres and tropes is definitely commendable, but I'm not sure it always works. I'm also not sure if I fully got everything in the end, but I absolutely enjoyed the ride. It's a good-looking movie, great performances, and definitely will keep you guessing until the end. It pretty much flopped on initial release, which I can kinda see why, especially with how it was marketed, but ever since became a bit of a cult movie, which I can definitely see why as well. Please, don't be fooled by the somewhat lame, generic, uninspired title and poster, because this is quite something. Check it out. The first out of 3 Japanese movies on this list, it's From Miyamoto to You. So, I became highly intrigued by this one after reading several reviews describing it as an extremely uncomfortable, ragingly angry movie. But how? I mean, look at that rom-com looking poster and the premise of, quote-unquote, a young and relatively inexperienced man comes across a woman during his working day and sparks fly. But then I found out it's directed by Tetsuya Mariko, who also did Destruction Babies, and it all made a lot more sense. One review reads, "Think Marriage Story on steroids." Which, while I haven't seen Marriage Story, I can sort of see why. Tone-wise, I'm sure, not so much quality-wise, perhaps. Our male protagonist, he's such a deeply flawed, frustrating character. The situations he creates and gets himself into are so discomforting. Lots of horrible stuff bordering on the funny. And there is so much screaming. Again, haven't seen Marriage Story, but Possession definitely came to mind multiple times. It's overly melodramatic, drenched in toxic masculinity, and has somewhat unnecessary filler making it over 2 hours long. I can definitely see why people would hate this, but I don't know, I personally just kinda love the chaotic energy of it all. So, yeah, check it out. Maybe? So, I'm generally somewhat picky when it comes to found footage style movies, but this year we have 2 of them on the list. The second being House LLC. From what I understand, a bit of a fan favorite, and I'm glad I finally watched it because it's pretty good. It genuinely creeped me out without relying too heavily on cheap jump scares. I like the setup. A group of haunted house creators document setting up their latest project, but creepy stuff, all of which is framed within a documentary about said incident. Perfect setup for some creepy scenes and set pieces, all of which is rather effectively done. Again, like I said, without cramming the movie with cheap jump scares. I kinda don't care for the trope of having one of the cast being a jackass that's always pulling pranks, and then when actual weird stuff happens, everybody being like, oh, must have been jackass guy. But besides that, I really don't have any complaints. It might not have revolutionized the genre, but if you haven't seen it and you're up for a sincerely spooky time, check it out. Matando Cabos, Killing Cabos. A Mexican crime comedy in the style of early Tarantino and Guy Ritchie. Getting into the plot really isn't necessary for now. Just think of it as a seemingly never-ending, escalating chain of crazy coincidences, misunderstandings, and just the worst luck. I don't know if there's a term for this kind of writing, like storytelling, but when done well, it can make for an hilarious movie. Which I think absolutely is the case here with Killing Cabos. Sure, you'll have to really suspend your disbelief in order to enjoy it. All sad coincidences and misunderstandings are so unbelievably absurd and over the top. There's like no way any of this would realistically play out the way it does. But again, if you accept that, just sort of turn off your brain and go with the flow, you're in for a jolly good time. I saw it pretty early on in 2024, and honestly, I had kind of already forgotten what exactly happened, but just now, while writing the script, going through the Wikipedia plot summary, I kept going like, oh yeah, huh, oh yeah, huh. So yeah, definitely a fun crime comedy worth checking out. And just like with the previous movie, I saw Love Lies Bleeding pretty early last year in theaters, and while compiling this list, I was like, wait, that was this year? That's crazy. The movie is great though. Like Anora, Love Lies Bleeding was definitely one of the bigger releases of the year, and tells the story of a gym manager who falls in love with a traveling bodybuilder, who then together get wrapped up in a spiral of crime linked to the gym manager's criminal father. Besides the marvelous technical filmmaking here, I think I mostly appreciated this movie for its two main characters. They're realistically flawed, badass women, characters we simply do not see enough in movies this size. Also, the fact that the movie takes itself deadly serious and actually pulls that off, including taking things in some rather unexpected stylistic choices towards the end. Besides that, not much to add. It's a solid crime thriller, sprinkled with a dose of tender yet gritty romance that's absolutely worth checking out. The second and final movie from former Yugoslavia, Meeting Place, or The Meeting Point? This time around, the social commentary makes place for magic realism as we follow an archaeologist who suddenly dies soon after unearthing an ancient ruin that happens to be some kind of portal to the afterlife, or like an afterlife lobby, where the archaeologist now finds himself reconnecting with people he knew in his life, including his wife. Although while back in the living world, his sudden death sparks bickering among his family members. I love the well-balanced mixture of genre and tone here. The movie goes from goofy funny to more serious and mature, from wholesome to earnest, all like it's nothing. Also, perhaps my favorite, or well, I can't say that I've seen that many, but truly wonderful depiction of this semi-afterlife. Rather nuanced, but still otherworldly enough to be quite memorable. Not super easy to get into, also because of its large set of characters being introduced, but for me personally, it definitely paid off, resulting in a magical piece of Eastern European filmmaking. Then we have Monster, which I super randomly went in completely blind while on a flight, but I'm really glad I did because I kind of fell in love with it. It tells the story of a young boy who starts acting strangely, which his mother suspects is the result of abuse by one of his teachers. But we're dealing with a Rashomon style of storytelling here, where we get to see the same story from different perspectives, with the viewer little by little piecing together the actual true story and timeline. And it works so well. It doesn't ever feel gimmicky, as it actually makes perfect sense here, with the type of story being told and the different characters involved. Like, you are gonna have different versions of the same incidents. It's quite the emotionally heavy ride, filled with twists and turns, but not so much in a gotcha way. Again, it all feels rather organic, and ultimately kind of sweet. All of which is made possible by fantastic filmmaking, great performances, and a beautiful soundtrack. Yeah, brilliant movie. Ooh, No One Will Save You. A sci-fi movie where we follow a young, shunned woman living alone in a small town who one day, finds herself in the middle of an alien invasion. Gotta hate that. All of which is very well paced. It doesn't take long for the action to start, and once it does, it basically just keeps going. Which it kinda has to, as there's virtually no dialogue in this movie. Which also works really well and doesn't feel forced. Like, it makes sense in the story. I kind of like how they went for a very traditional look for the aliens and their saucers with their beams, while still giving them their own original traits. It's just a shame that the CGI sucked pretty bad, which is probably my biggest complaint here. And the ending, which I'm still not sure how to feel about. But the ride was great. Caitlin Dever, as her lead, did a fantastic job. The movie looks great, it explores some interesting themes, although arguably a little tiresome at this point in elevated horror trauma, but I feel like it was mostly handled with care. So yeah, overall, quite an enjoyable and effective modern take on the classic alien invasion trope. Then we have an early Denis Villeneuve movie, Polytechnique, a true crime drama thriller based on one of Canada's deadliest mass shootings, where a guy shot and killed 14 women at the titular university. Shown from different perspectives, with jumps in time, like certain scenes we get to see twice, the movie avoids becoming gratuitous or sensationalized, which I appreciated. It goes back and forth between moments of tense shootouts, for lack of a better description, and more up-close and personal scenes focused on the main characters. There are themes of misogyny, the shooter did specifically target women, but it doesn't lean into this too heavily, which may or may not be a good thing. And in general, making a movie based on such heinous true crime tragedies always falls in an iffy gray moral area, but purely based on the movie itself, I thought it was a fantastic, emotionally draining experience that's worth checking out if you're okay with that. Oh my goodness, skinned deep. For what should have been, for all intents and purposes, just run-of-the-mill, low-budget, Texas Chainsaw Massacre-inspired straight-to-video schlock, they somehow managed to make this quite a memorable, delirious fever dream of a horror movie. It tells the story of a family that falls victim to this deranged family, but it doesn't even really matter. It's all in the presentation. And while I wouldn't say it's necessarily a well-made movie, a lot of that actually made it work so well for me. The handheld, wide-angle cinematography, the odd dubbing, it's all just so bonkers with zany characters and awesome, crazy and wild makeup and practical special effects. Which does make sense here, given the director Gabriel Bartolos is primarily known as a special effects artist. Really, I was so pleasantly surprised by just how fun this one is. It feels way more like a lost gem from the 80s than something from the mid-2000s. I really hope I'm doing it justice with just this short review, but if this looks like your kind of fun chaos, definitely check it out. So, I wanted to do a The Horrors of 2024 video series late last year, but ended up not finding the time to do so, which is a shame because there was some great stuff coming out last year. I've not included any of them in this video, but I made an exception for Stopmotion, because I feel like this one in particular deserves a little extra attention. We follow Ella, a stop-motion animator who has always lived in the shadow of her mother's successful career, but then when her mother falls into a coma, she finally gets a chance to focus on her own project, which she becomes increasingly obsessed with, and you've guessed it. I mostly just love the originality and creativity of the story. And, while ultimately the themes might feel a little familiar within the realm of elevated horror, it still managed to feel fresh. Ella's slow descent into madness makes for some absolutely memorable scenes. It has this overall creepy tone and atmosphere to it, not a small part thanks to the excellent stop-motion animation. And it makes sense that it was done with such care, given that director Robert Morgan has a strong background in animation. Yeah, definitely one of last year's standout horror movies for me. The Structure of Crystal, and oh my, I was quite intimidated going into this one, having previously seen director Krzysztof Zanussi's arguably best-known movie Illumination and finding it quite overwhelming. But I was relieved to discover that this was much more accessible and honestly just a really good movie. It follows two old friends who once studied physics together and now reconnect when one of them visits the other. It's almost like a hangout movie, very observational. I was really happy, pleasantly surprised by how it balances both heavy, in-depth, and more superficial conversations and dialogue. And it's exactly this mix that makes it such a profoundly and sincerely humane movie. Their chemistry feels so natural and authentic, and honestly, I might have enjoyed the scenes of them all just hanging out and goofing around the most. Lovely black and white cinematography, beautiful piano score. I might not be totally selling this movie, and it is quite the departure from what I normally talk about on my channel, but I do really hope I can convince at least some of you to give it a chance. It's relatively short, and by the end, I mostly found myself wanting to just, hang out with these guys some more. And, that has to say at least something about the quality of the movie, right? Yeah, good stuff. From Pier Paolo Pasolini, on this channel perhaps best known for directing Salo, comes Theorem. Theorem? Interestingly, I might have first heard about this movie way back as potentially the inspiration for Takashi Miike's Visitor Q, and, last year I finally watched it and it's quite something.
It tells a story of a bougie, upper-class family whose lives are disrupted by the sudden arrival of a mysterious stranger who has some kind of sexual encounter with each family member, all of whom are dealing with their own personal struggles. And then when he soon after leaves as abruptly as he came, they're all forced to confront what the stranger unearthed within them. So, I can get pretty frustrated by movies that are hard to understand, to interpret. And while I'm still not sure I fully got it, I had a really good time with Theorem trying to figure it all out and, reading into it, all the different interpretations. Obviously a bit of an attack, or at the very least, some kind of commentary on the upper class. But even without trying to decipher it all, there's just something very mesmerizing about this movie. The characters, the pacing, the almost spiritual atmosphere and journeys. But I am trying to keep these little reviews short, so if you're intrigued by any of this, honestly, it's not going to be an easy watch, but could ultimately be a highly rewarding experience. Whenever my wife and I go movie hunting, she somehow very often ends up finding some super obscure Japanese exploitation flick we end up enjoying quite a bit. The last one being Uncle's Paradise. And even though she didn't love it, and it's absolutely not one of the best movies I've seen in 2024, I just have to talk about it for a minute. It tells a story of a young man who takes in his horny uncle who, when he's not falling asleep, tries to bang every woman he comes across. And then some more random, wacky, and crazy shit happens. And if it wasn't for the somewhat uneven pacing and kind of uninteresting, bland presentation, this would have been an instant favorite. I still quite enjoyed it though. It's so goofy, nonsensical, but still played somewhat straight. Towards the end, it gets pretty wild and surreal, with a depiction of hell in the form of a love hotel. And then it just sorta ends. Going into these random pinkus completely blind is often part of the fun, and in this particular case, it did honestly pay off quite well. So, if you enjoy these low-budget 2000s pinku cinema, and you happen to stumble across this one, give it a shot. You might really enjoy it. And then, for our final movie of the day, let's head over to Russia for Why Don't You Just Die? Which is, obviously, a fantastic title. Pretty fantastic movie as well, while we're at it. It's a darkly comedic crime thriller that tells a story of this young man who visits his girlfriend's father to take care of some business, but then in a long chain of wild twists, not unlike what we saw in Killing Cabos, a bunch of crazy shit happens. A friend and I discussed what this type of storytelling could be called and ultimately landed on "and then it gets worse," which is very much applicable here as well. Mostly set within just one apartment, save for a handful of flashbacks to flesh out the story, this movie perfectly blends dark comedy, crime tropes, action set pieces, and a very healthy dose of gory practical effects, resulting in a highly entertaining roller coaster of a ride. Quirky, highly stylized visuals, memorable characters, banging soundtrack. Honestly, it's a hoot. Perfect if you're in the mood for an over-the-top, energetic, fun experience. And that brings us to the end of this video. As I always say at the end of these best movies I watched in so-and-so videos, these are some of my favorite to do, simply because it gives me the opportunity to talk about something a little different from my, more typical, usual content on my channel. And, well, if some of you out there saw a title on this list that might have piqued your interest and you end up watching it and loving it, well, then I could not have asked for a better start of this new year. Check out my Patreon if you want to support what I do here with my YouTube channel. Give me a follow on Instagram to see a little bit more in between my usual months of absence here on YouTube. And if you haven't already, give me a follow on Letterboxd, because I'm actually trying to review everything that I'm watching this year, something that I've been slacking with really bad the previous year. And I think that's it. Cheers, guys. Have a nice day.